Okay, welcome, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's edition of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, feminist, and literary perspective. I'm one of your hosts, Joel, and with me, as always, is the incorrigible
Brian. Hello.
Hello. This week we are watching and talking about episode 3 of season 3, Faith, Hope, and Trick. How are you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
You good? Yeah, I'm good.
Joel, I'm not to worry or anything, but you're looking kind of old.
The sands of time have swept past, yes?
Yeah, wow. I can see at least, 5 new wrinkles. There's definitely some grey in your beard.
I was going to say, I don't think
any news you want to tell us?
I was going to say, I don't think I was this mean on your birthday, but I probably was.
Joel, you spent the weekend... every so often you look at me and you say, God, you're so old. And you're not joking.
It's true.
You're not being kind or funny or ironic. You're just saying it because you think I look old. So
I think I'm definitely reaching the peak at which, if I'm going to be sired, it kind of has to be soon, or else I'm just going to be an old vampire.
Yeah, you're going to be an old person. Yeah. Ooh.
Can vampires get new haircuts and lose weight and stuff?
So the haircut thing I worry about.
Well, no, because Angel obviously cut his hair.
Yeah,
but they could never grow out again.
Maybe.
Does he have a limited amount of hairs?
I wonder. I mean, your hair does grow after you die.
Yeah, but vampires do many things that horses don't, so I don't know if the logic...
Yeah, but I mean, that's true, but I mean, the hair growth is based on sustenance and protein stuff, and blood is full of protein, I think. Yeah, it must be.
Full of reg proteins.
Full of iron. Anyway.
Putting our ARCs degrees to use here.
So yeah, did you have a nice time for your birthday?
I did very little today, which is all I want from my birthday weekend, and most days is doing nothing, so I can't complain.
Yeah, you played a bunch of Control, which is a new video game, which you seem to like.
I did. It's an exciting video game from the stolen from the mindscape of David Lynch, but no actual affiliation. And yeah, it just involves kind of trippy corridors and people literally speaking backwards and fighting people, mirror versions of yourself and all that, and that's my whole jam.
Yeah,
there's a lot you can read into it.
We watched 2 movies last week. We watched more, but we watched 3 good movies last week. We watched 3 good movies last week. We also watched Logan's Run and The Witches on my birthday, so yeah, we did. Movie heavy. But we watched Steven Universe, the movie.
Steven Universe movie was amazing. Yes.
It was really, really good. Mm-hmm. Our friend Keen put it on his projector for us, and it was a good time was had by us. The music was really good, and the animation was gorgeous. It was also just a classic Steven Universe storyline and message, which is try to like yourself and be kind, and if other people do bad things, that's crap, but also let's try to do good things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of 1920s, 1930s style animation.
Yeah, Steamboat Willie kind of stuff. Steamboat Willie? Mickey. Steamboat Mickey. Yes. Because that's Mickey Mouse. Yes. And we went to see It Chapter 2 on Thursday.
Yeah. We actually went to see both It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 on Thursday.
It was hell.
It
took 5.5 hours. We started at 7 o'clock. We got out at 12:30.
Yeah, it did replicate the experience of being trapped in some kind of horror scenario.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I liked It Chapter 1 a lot when it came out. I really liked it on rewatch. And It Chapter 2 I liked a lot too. And it actually nicely, as a double bill, there was a good bit of flashback to the first movie, but not too much. So they did actually sit nicely together as one watching. But you'd want to be in your house where you can go to the bathroom and drink excessively and, bitch about the movies and tear them apart while you're watching. Because watching them in the cinema was just my brain was broke after.
It was the first horror experience I've had in a cinema where there actually was someone sitting about 3 seats down from me saying, "No, don't go in there. Why are you going back that way?
Yeah.
No, the It is that way." And it's no, we get it. You're doing the thing. But no, it was intriguing. It was
it was okay.
There was some intriguing elements about it for me as a... I don't think it's fair to say I'm a Stephen King fan anymore. I think that's diluted with age, but there definitely was a time where I was a big fan of his work, and definitely of his most classically appreciated work. There's
Shining,
The Shining,
It, Carrie,
Misery, all this kind of stuff. There is a lot of tremendous horror in there, tremendously artistically crafted horror.
Yeah.
Personally, I find as I get older, the issue with Stephen King is a lot of that really good writing has been diluted by a lot of low quality writing and a lot of
revisionism as well.
Revisionism and a lot of problematic writing. You can't have a Stephen King text that doesn't have some moment where he has kind of unnecessarily included weird sexual elements that are not narrative choices, but just author insert choices. There's racism, the sexism,
Huge
homophobia,
racist issues, yeah.
and the problem with it as a text.
And the racist issues, the thing with the racist issues is that, like, you know, you can tell Stephen King was trying his best with the racist stuff. I mean, his characters become stereotypes, but he's trying his best to include black people and trying to be considerate towards that. I think he just didn't like gay people in the 80s, realistically, because the gay people he portrays, they're like depraved and are killed horribly and deserve to be killed horribly, basically.
That's a strong interpretation, but it's probably not an unfounded one. And I suppose one of the interesting things about watching It, particularly when the It films moved the timeline up. So when the book came out, the present day was contemporaneous with the books, which was like 1980s, and the child era was set in the 50s, and now it's the 30 years forward, so people are returning to Derry, which is the town from It,
in 2016.
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of reconstruction where they've tried to downplay or recontextualize some of the homophobic moments in it, some of the sexist moments, but they're so fundamentally part of the text that it's hard to work around. So I found it interesting to watch for that reason. But again, it's a phenomenon I think we're seeing a lot with media in the last 10 years, where, and, you know, I've kind of alluded to before to this, you know, say my old kind of marking stone of Doctor Who, originally written by, you know, cis white men, homophobic, very xenophobic people on the whole. That's very unfair, but that was the atmosphere of the time, and has now been kind of reclaimed by a generation of watchers who were, you know, will be considered more progressive now. This is happening with things like It, where people like me read it when they're younger, metabolize the positive, the engaging, the kind of thought-provoking elements of it, and now want to make it better. But that's an interesting thing to do. Should we try to fix these things, or should we just write new and better things? You know, it's kind of this ongoing argument.
I mean, like, to be fair, both actresses for the Beverly character in It, like, just because we are doing a Buffy podcast, we should probably focus on the feminist issues in it. Both actors for Beverly were good. So it's Bryce Dallas Howard, and the young girl, I don't know her name, but she was also in Sharp Objects. But they're both great. But just that character is so excessively traumatized by the text in a way that just is not required for any of the other characters. So in the first movie, you know, while the other characters are dealing with, you know, definitely racism and bullying and bereavement, she's being, like, actively raped by her father, for one thing. And then, like, you know, when they all have their traumatizing moment by It, so Bill sees his brother in the basement. Beverly looks down a sink and it spews blood on her for like 5 minutes straight.
It's
in
much
the movie.
more graphic and
so
punishing.
Graphic and punishing, and it's actively a reference to her having gotten her first period, and it's just so excessive. And then her father comes along and can't see it, and she's just drenched in blood. And it's just like, even like looking at that, like, that child actor is put through so much more than any of the other characters in that scene. And it's just like, I don't know, it felt like gross. It felt like a gross interpretation, or not interpretation. It felt like a gross approach to a female character. And the same in the second movie, while they do tone down some of the stuff from the book in terms of her husband, that stuff is still there. And just like any of the interactions she has with It, they're all a lot more aggressive than they are to any of the men characters. So,
which actually is interesting, given that it's not necessarily one of the vectors that It as a horror creature attacks on. So it textually, like, It, the monster that is It,
feeds on fear,
and isn't particularly drawn to feed on children. It's just children's fears are easier to manifest. That's the reason for it. And there's also strong implication towards, and spoilers for anyone who hasn't written It, but it came out like 35 years ago. Towards the end of the book, when they find Its lair, it's implied that It is actually female.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's laying eggs and it's trying to reproduce and all this kind of stuff. So so the fact that there's no textual reason for a monster to do something leaves the responsibility, I think, then with the author to be
considerate,
and not put, you know, people in circumstances where they're unnecessarily kind of abused for being women if there's no merit or no character development or nothing other than the shock value. I think that's what, not obviously kind of, you know, careening back towards Buffy, but that's something that Buffy has always deftly avoided, because by nature of the text and by nature of both the real world and the supernatural elements of Buffy, women are often put in positions of extreme jeopardy and extreme prejudice and extreme vulnerability.
I'll say Reptile Boy, where it's Buffy and Cordelia in a basement, locked up, and what do they have to do? They have to like tear themselves from the wall. They have to wrestle with the manacles and overthrow the male oppressor.
Yeah, and no one's saying that we can't have scenes,
in which women
are in them. And
women are jeopardized a lot in real life. It's absolutely appropriate to show it in media.
Absolutely, but I think it's funny because we spend so much time, and we do because it's an enjoyable process, but like minutely dissecting and kind of reflecting on things. But at the end of the day, there are some things which perhaps contradictory. I feel like there's a gut feeling, like when something feels rotten or not.
Yeah,
and definitely even with the best updating of something like it, there's still something at the core there where the woman is there as a punching bag for the story.
Yeah,
and something like Buffy, that's not the case.
Joss Whedon's stated vision for Buffy was always, that you follow this beautiful young vulnerable girl out into an alleyway, and when you think in a horror movie and you think she's going to be the victim of some monster, and she turns around and kicks his ass. And this is the literal interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So as we arrive in this episode, Faith, Hope and Tricks. Oh fuck, we haven't done any of the introduction stuff.
No, this is a perfectly good time to do it.
Okay, cool.
Fresh in people's minds.
So this is Faith, Hope and Trick. Season 3, episode 3. It was first aired on October 13th, 1998. It was written by David Greenwald, who we've had before. He also wrote Angel, Ted, Reptile Boy, a couple of other things. I don't rate him too much, to be honest. And it was directed by James A. Contner, who also...
Say that again, sorry, Brian.
Directed by James A. Contner.
Great, just for one clear read. Yeah.
You're welcome. Who also directed Bewitched, Bothered and Bewildered, and will direct quite a bit as we come up. And this is... let's do the Buffy and summary, I suppose. I was not ready for this.
We only do this every week.
Faith, Kendra's replacement, arrives in Sunnydale pursued by her enemy Kakistos and black techie vampire Trick. She and Buffy are prickly before bonding to defeat Kakistos. Giles persuades Buffy to talk. She admits that Angel was re-ensouled, and when she stabbed him, she leaves her ring in Angel's mansion, and Angel reappears out of his mind. Okay, well, that's interesting. Why do people do this thing where when you mention someone who's not white, you have to distinguish them as being not white? It's the only good thing about the Hunger Games books is that there's a couple of points in which he's like the character of Katniss is referred to as being potentially Native American. Never refer to her skin color. They talk about her, or they might refer to her skin color in a very obtuse way, but like not because like it's not that it's a post-racial world, but it's a para-racial world in some ways.
Yeah.
But like, why the fuck would you just be like, oh, and this person who's black? It's like
it's actually a very good question. It's one I think that we can look at with Mr. Trick by virtue of being one of the few black characters, established characters to some degree in Buffy. Yeah, because sometimes it's not necessarily make that distinction. And sometimes he is a prominent black character,
one of the few,
which is unusual. But his characterization is also built around, I would argue, him being performatively black.
Yes.
In terms of the
speech he has in the episode is...
And I will frame it in that us not being American or North American and not having the exposure to the same issues of
race and diversity and
that are predominant in that culture,
which is a weird one for Ireland, because I mean sometimes I get worried that people might see Ireland's like demographics in terms of like the racial breakdown and be like, God, Ireland's a very racist place, because basically the amount of racial diversity we have as a country is extremely low. We have some Eastern European population. We have quite a significant Brazilian population, but it's because Ireland was never a global power of colonization. That's why England and America have such a huge racial diversity. Is that they stole people? People
were never brought here in the same.
Absolutely,
same way,
absolutely. So it's a weird it's a weird positive thing in some ways. That I mean, like, it'd be amazing if Ireland was more racially diverse, no doubt. But it's also it's due to a positive reason that we aren't.
Yeah, it's an odd one.
Yeah.
But so I will frame it with that before we talk about Mr. Trick. But we can speak to the best of our knowledge, and I think what they do is they have Mr. Trick's dialogue has a lot of stuff that airs close to what I would consider blaxploitation.
Okay.
and blaxploitation being a specific term from film of kind of a
70s,
80s kind of midnight movie, B movies, where perhaps one of the I don't know if it would necessarily be fair to include it in blaxploitation, but one of the
People do.
most famous examples would be Shaft, and films of lesser quality to that.
Often, if you want to look at a kind of a movie that like refers to blaxploitation a lot, Blade would be one of them, and also Jackie Brown by Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, because I was specifically going to mention Blade because Blade famously played in the movie by Wesley Snipes, but also an actual Marvel comic character. Early on was a heavily criticised one-dimensional blaxploitation character that was kind of revisionistly reconstructed in kind of the late 80s, early 90s to have more character. But or more character development.
I actually interrupted you there, so you didn't actually get to define blaxploitation. If you want to go ahead there,
yeah. So it's essentially that. It's essentially, and I'm not going to give any kind of impersonations or anything, but just characters that acting in a very one-dimensional, very stereotypical African American way. There's a lot of repetitive tropes and very distinct, perhaps unrealistic language and idioms and slang used, which is like all stereotypes, or like a lot of stereotypes and a lot of performances. It's not that it doesn't have elements of truth to it in the sense of elements of slang or language that might actually being used, but it's the way in which it's exaggerated with the lack of other character that makes it reductive. And with Mr. Trick, now we've seen more of him, and there's some, again, positive elements to his portrayal, but he talks a lot with that kind of
slightly you might refer to as jive kind of accent,
and not that we would consider it jive, but that is kind of what it's trying to portray, this kind of very very stereotypical African American man. There's a lot of talk about how there's not a lot of love for the brothers in the Sunnydale town, that kind of thing, which at the same time is making a very valid point, which is you have a black character coming in and saying Sunnydale's incredibly white, and it's true, and there's just an element of him, kind of, there's a jazz lounge kind of smooth talking element to his portrayal. So I would not go as far as say that I think Mr. Trick is inherently a racist character, a racist stereotype. But
he's far from the racial character. He's far from the racial representation that Buffy needs.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you have the two multi-episode black characters being Kendra, who we've addressed has significant issues with her othering, and Mr. Trick, which is also other in a different way, in some ways the assimilated other, and the amount that he talks about modern technology and the information superhighway, that's very much embodying the American kind of 80s dream kind of thing of progress and big cell phones and Wall Street and that whole vibe. So I think we probably, now correct me if I'm wrong, but we probably have to wait until season 7 to have a black character who is just a person as opposed to a collection of signifying kind of idioms. Except
for Giles's girlfriend. You're right.
Yeah, and she is. I could be corrected when we get to those episodes, but she is kind of in passing.
She's past. I mean, like she's not a significant character, but at least she's allowed to just breathe as a character.
Yeah.
So Elise Ray Helford, who I actually have an essay I want to talk about by her later on. But I actually found this quotation on Wikipedia, so that's kind of funny. But she says, that Mr. Trick does have an odd amount of text in this episode, of lines in this episode for a minor character. And she says, he overtly clarifies the racial metaphor underlying the show's narrative by comparing African Americans in Washington, D.C. with vampires in Sunnydale, and by conceiving both as equivalent examples of darkness. So yeah, I mean, there is some element of textualization of the racial issues in this episode. So that's interesting and something we should bear in mind. He also oddly represents a weird amount of absolutely modernization, but also consumption. And consumption is a weird issue in Buffy just generally. So in this episode, he kind of represents that kind of industrialization and globalization and consumerism, because at one point he goes to get a drive-through, and he orders a drink, and he feels hungry, so he pulls the drive-thru worker in through the window of his limousine and drains him. And then another point, he orders pizza and just has the pizza boy drop the pizza at the door and drains him too. And he also does he talk in this episode? I know he talks at one point about ordering a girl from Thailand or from maybe it was from the Philippines, and having it delivered to his door, basically.
If it wasn't in this episode, I'm definitely familiar with that as well. But basically, yeah, with the information superhighway, you can just, if you have, if something along the lines, if you have a hankering for a Filipina girl, a 15-year-old Filipina, you can FedEx her here in a day, and that's like the future of being a vampire. Whereas in this episode, he's presented as the right hand man of Kakistos, who is an ancient vampire, who is again much more medieval, much more romantic with the capital O in his portrayal, and it's meant to be a contrast there. But yeah, he is absolutely the element of vampirism that
Booker, stop.
The element of vampirism that Buffy has portrayed interestingly about vampires essentially being animals rather than intriguing creatures, and that hunger is something that he brings to the fore, and it's portrayed as a modern aspect, very much so, in contrast to Kakistos, who is another vampire in the similar vein as the Master, who is Kakistos, according to Giles, being from the Greek for the worst of the worst, and he was so old that his hands and feet had become cloven, which again is a vampire image that I remember very vividly. I think it's a very strong lore image.
Totally agree. And also when he has to be staked by something bigger than just a normal stake, that's also consistent. Everywhere I read about this episode was like, that's actually consistent with what else happens in this show. Yeah, because the Master also had to be staked with a
dropped on a table. And then later we have significantly the Turakhan, who are ancient vampires and need to be killed much more viciously. Yeah, so I like that. I like that lore stuff. That gives me.
Yeah, me too. I like Kakistos. Faith arrives in this episode fully formed.
Absolutely,
love her so much. I like her so much. Whenever people refer to me as B, and that happens only very rarely, I think every single time about Faith. But yeah, she's great. She highlights quite a lot of stuff for Buffy. Faith's portrayal in this show, I mean, problematic, no doubt. In terms of her gender and her background, and we'll definitely get into that over the season, and other seasons, I suppose. Because I mean, so just to give you a quick preview. So as I was referring to earlier, Elise Ray Helford has a really interesting essay which I'd recommend reading about it's called My Emotions Give Me Power. I would refer to it quite a bit when we're talking about Kendra, because it's highlighting Buffy as being the sweet spot of like emotional womanhood for the show, that basically Buffy can get by being emotional because she's not too emotional, but she has some emotions. So Kendra represents the overly controlled, unexpressive black character, and then Faith represents the lower class, overly emotional, overly aggressive woman.
Impulsive.
Yeah, impulsive. And Buffy is allowed to exist and continue to exist in a non-comatose, non-dead, non-punished state because she's just the right amount of white angry, basically. So definitely do read that. But she also highlights that Faith is punished for being a woman. I mean, like, if you look at what Angel does in this show, and definitely in Angel, the show, he commits far worse acts than Faith ever does in Buffy. Yeah. Faith is punished so heavily for it, and Angel just never is. So it's an interesting one.
And I think probably an interesting element of that is, again, just to put in context, so she initially comes to Sunnydale under the fiction that her watcher has gone to a watcher's retreat in the Cotswolds, and she's kind of skipped out to meet Buffy. But we find out that Kakistos actually
has been chasing her,
and you and I discussed how she can't, obviously she can't have been the Slayer for more than about 4 months, but in that time she's been chasing her and has, it's implied, brutally murdered her original watcher, who was a woman, and I don't think we've had any specific female watchers referenced before,
except for Giles's grandmother and aunt, mother and grandmother.
Was that is that reference in the show as opposed to
I think so. In Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, but I could be wrong.
Fair enough. Well, anyway, it's a rare one, but also the fact that the second watcher comes initially, or the fake watcher Gwendolyn Post, is also a woman, and there's elements of her Faith, enjoying the maternal attention that Joyce gives her. But again, it's actually not 1,000 miles from what we were talking about with it. There's just a sense of viciousness that comes towards women, whereas kind of men tend to die like nobly or go mad, in kind of a very stiff upper lip way. There's a sense of grossness, that comes from this, a sense of pursuit, and Kakistos being a very bestial vampire specifically.
And very masculine, aggressively masculine. You're very right. JP Williams actually highlights this episode. We've referred to it before about the issues of around motherhood in Buffy, and about how the characters are constantly searching for mothers, and basically highlights this episode as being the episode in which we kind of get the background for Faith. Faith's like, looking for a mother. So when she gets to her fake watcher, it's because she has lost both her alcoholic mother, who she refers to as being dead in this episode, and her watcher, who presumably took reasonably good care of her or something, but she's traumatized by this, and that's the kind of the basis in which she's searching for a mother figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this episode in one fell swoop introduces a surprising amount of narrative texture, because you have obviously the racial issues Mr. Trick introduces, a swathe of stuff for Buffy herself in terms of this feeling of doubling and comparison, which she struggles with being compared to things and judged and sized up.
Well, Faith is the new shadow Buffy. Let's be real.
But Faith introduces an element of socioeconomic complication and perspective, which even going into it with her eyes open as we have, you kind of really do look at when Faith arrives, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, they're all real well off. Yeah, even when Joyce is struggling with the art gallery, and Xander obviously has issues of being not as well off and not from as comfortable background as his friends, but it's still within a certain bracket, and Faith is from a completely different a lifestyle, completely different background. So it does show stark contrast there.
Let's be real, she's 16 years old at this point. I'm pretty sure she's definitely younger than Buffy. And she's having to pay for a motel room with her own money. She has no way of earning money. She's a slayer. She has no support system whatsoever. Really interesting. So I was reading Rhonda Wilcox in Fighting the Forces, one of her essays, and what she says is that Faith's motel room very specifically highlights Buffy's position 2 episodes ago. So Buffy was in Anne. Her Anne room was very similar to Faith's, run down the wrong side of Sunnydale kind of space. And Buffy's very quickly forgotten that it was a role she was playing over a summer, was the down on her luck young woman. And Faith actually does have to exist in that, and Buffy just doesn't have very much patience for her. And it's a weird one.
And even when Buffy is on, she's a waitress, but there's a certain, innocent girl new to the big city trying to keep her head down kind of vibe, where Faith almost doesn't have the luxury of doing that. And when you think about it in the context of her being, as you said, she was consistently abandoned by either intentionally or unintentionally guardian figures, being 16, trying to survive, clearly traumatized, and
by her family background and by her experiences.
Yeah, because when Kakistos arrives at the motel and bursts in probably one of the most, I think, significant moments in the episode, Faith, who has been all bravado up until this and all brashness and all confidence, just starts screaming and is completely traumatized by it and completely paralyzed by it. And obviously, it's played for laughs to a certain extent with her interactions with Xander, and her comments about how slaying makes you hungry and horny, which is a really interesting one to unpack. But she's very sexualized.
Yes.
And that's, and she is exactly where Buffy was kind of end of season 1, where Buffy had all these themes of purity and Virginia and the white dress and the purification of water, and that's how she was couched. Whereas with Faith, she's had to move in a kind of a dirtier world, kind of a more complicated, less clear cut world, and that kind of lack of, or that prolific amount of grey area is obviously what leads her to down the path into the mayor and killing a person and all this kind of stuff.
Sure. Well, one very interesting parallel between Buffy and Faith in this episode, and I really do think that one of the major themes in this episode is trying to just aggressively draw parallels between Buffy and Faith. One of them is that Faith is obviously packing to get out of town in this episode, and like aggressively packing. Need to stop saying aggressively. Really actively packing her suitcase, which is of course echoing what Buffy was doing in Deadman's Party when she's caught by Willow and her mother packing a bag to leave again. So it's this issue of abandonment, running away, and seeing your what's coming for you and trying to run away from it. Essentially,
but in Faith's case, there's no one to come in and stop her.
Well, yeah, what she does have though is Buffy to come in and shite her.
Yeah,
which is kind of the way that this show goes. Really, they just the treatment of Faith in this by the Scoobies is just upsetting.
Yeah, I will say before we see more Faith, even though it's entirely quasi canonical and it's not mentioned in the show, she is Faith Lehane in my head. They've kind of really consistently established her surname as being Lehane.
Is that only in the comics?
It's never mentioned in the show, and it was mentioned in the comics. It's mentioned in various other production materials. I think Joss Whedon may have said at one point that was the name he assumed that she had, but it's never stated in the show. That's my understanding. And similarly with Kendra, her last name being Kendra Young.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I just think that this is a different issue to the issue of the first Slayer. I think where we can give them last names, we should, because there's a certain amount of
depersonification.
Yeah, we don't really learn a lot about her actual background, her actual parents, and that kind of stuff. And I think it gives more humanity to the character in a way.
I'd agree. So Wilcox also says a couple of interesting things about Faith in this episode. So she kind of highlights this as being the end of a 3-act structure for Buffy's movement here. So Anne represented Buffy going it alone and trying to like throw off the shackles of connection and of being a person in a family and having friends. And then Deadman's Party, saw her trying to suppress her emotions for Angel and like all that stuff going on. And again, testing, kind of going it alone. And in this episode, we kind of see Faith, who comes to really, really exemplify the idea of going it alone and not accepting the support of the people around you, and not having a familial and friend structure that is Buffy's greatest strength. So she says, Faith has no deep understanding of the need for or the value of shared effort or community, and that is what in the end will make her dangerous. Well, that was the worst thing I've read aloud, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, so it is Faith's loner status that does highlight her as like such a threat going on, and it's to highlight Buffy's greatest strength with it, which is her friend structure. Yeah, and it's something that Buffy interestingly kind of criticized both Kendra and Faith for, and both cases Giles was the one to explain that the reason why they're so focused on the slaying and why they're so mono kind of narrow vision about it is because they don't have anything else. And that is in both cases, whether even though Faith sees herself as an outsider and performs the outsider, in many ways as the prime slayer, the active slayer, she is performing that role. And if it's reasonable to expect that if she hadn't have encountered Buffy, she would have been another slayer who died essentially in a relatively short period of time. This episode really highlights Buffy's privilege in so many different ways. So not only is she economically privileged, she's privileged enough to have that group of friends and stuff. But that scene where that always bothered me, the scene where she's having dinner with Joyce and Faith. It's a great scene. Joyce is like, oh, two Slayers. You seem to really enjoy it. Buffy seems to hate being a Slayer, and it's all very
Buffy's always so negative. Why can't you just enjoy your work like Faith does?
Exactly. Buffy says to Joyce that she feels like I think this is the point, but she says that Faith is single white femaling her, which obviously great reference.
Nail on the
head. Single white female being the 90s movie with actresses whose name I don't remember, where one woman tries to take over the life of another because she's obsessed with her but also wants her life, etc. It's a great trope. But there's a scene where they're talking about this, and Buffy looks back into the dining room where Faith's on her own, and Faith is taking a couple of Buffy's chips or fries. And
no, I'm going to say chips because I'm going to derail your point momentarily. We observed that what they had for dinner was some meat, some boiled carrots, and oven chips, like McCain's oven chips, which is the most Irish/British meal you can possibly have. It was really incongruous.
Yeah, they're crinkly chips.
Yeah,
as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
But and I've always read this scene as, and Buffy's she's now helping herself to my chips or fries. That's what she says. But I remember watching this when I was younger and thinking, Faith is probably hungry. Like, she doesn't have any money. She doesn't have any way to get food. She can't go to school. She has no hopes to go to school because she doesn't have any friends at school. And Buffy's sitting there being like, she's taking my chips. And it's like, the kid's probably fucking hungry and she's younger than you and she has nothing.
Yeah.
And this episode really does highlight her privilege.
It's a couple of interesting allusions because Buffy says at one point that, you know, the Faith is the arrival of my best new little sis, and Joyce says, oh, you know, it's a good thing you're an only child because you clearly can't share.
Yeah.
Which is obviously foreshadowing, that Dawn will eventually be part of her revised timeline.
So you wanted to talk about the the introduction of the characters here?
Yeah, so this is the only example of a character being introduced in an episode that is centric about them specifically. So not only do we meet Faith in this episode, but this episode is the Faith show. This is an episode of Faith the Vampire Slayer. It's all about her background, her particular arch nemesis has come to town, what happened to her watcher, her establishing a relationship with almost every character, including Angel in absentia, because she talks about Angel and this confrontation with Buffy over that. Mm-hmm. So it's just it's such a forceful introduction of a character, and it works because, as we said, the reason why this works and it would not work in a lesser show is because Elijah Dushku carries it. She has a full sense of who Faith is. She's wonderful.
Beautiful.
She's beautiful. She has energy and verb that is not just a caricature of like a more fun Buffy.
And she arrives with like, you know, even like a vocabulary. Like, she has her vocabulary ready. She calls Buffy B, and
says
she
things are 5x5.
5x5, which is it's a radiography, not radiography, like a radio broadcast phrase. 5x5 means everything is clear. It's all like, you know, basically all clear, or like loud and clear.
And she arrives with inherent power by the fact that she clearly has the Buffy speak.
Yes,
she has it, but she has
she has a better version of Buffy.
She has her own spin on it to the extent that the Scoobies start adopting some of her phraseology.
Yeah, so
which is such a sense of like that's so invasive in Buffy's world.
Yeah, exactly. So at one point, Willow is talking to Buffy, and she says, "Don't worry, B." Buffy, because she sees that Buffy's like very heavily upset by this. It's great.
It's also just a kind of canonically a reference heavy episode because when they're introducing Faith to the school, they walk through and point to various places in previous episodes where they've been killed or sucked into a portal, or where Angel tried to kill Willow, or where Angel killed Miss Calendar, etc.
Yeah, or where the snakes were when everyone was eating spaghetti, etc.
Yeah, I think between that and the allusion, the brief allusion to the mayor, the allusion to the Watchers Council in the Cotswolds, and Giles waxing lyrical about how he wish he was invited kayaking and for a nightcap there, you have this sense, which as Buffy fans we now have, which is that this world is expansive, that there are potentially other Hellmouths, as the Watchers Council, there's multiple Slayers. Joyce is aware that Buffy's a Slayer. It's very lived in now. Oh,
you're right. Yeah, no, it is the natural expansion of this show. It's really well done as well. Can I talk to you a bit about Mark Field's interpretation of this episode?
I was actually hoping you would say that. So yes, please tell me about Mark Field's interpretation of this episode.
Okay, great. Okay, so he identifies it as being like very structured based on the title. So I'm not sure if you know what the title is a reference to. So it's to Corinthians, or just like generally the three virtues of Christianity. These can be either faith, hope, and love, or faith, hope, and charity. He reads it as love from Corinthians, something. And he first he talks about there are three tricks in this episode. Obviously, the trick the title refers to the three new characters introduced. It's Faith, Lahane, Scott Hope, who is the new person who Buffy might want to date, who she doesn't, thankfully, for not too long, and then Trick, Mr. Trick. So there's a couple of tricks in this episode. One is Giles tricks Buffy into talking about Angel and talking about him being reinsouled before he he cast into hell, because he's trying to help her to reintegrate and to open up about what happened, because basically he tells her that he needs to know the information about the circumstances of Angel's death to cast a binding spell on a Cathla, and this is his way to try to get her talking about it. It's actually very nicely done, because Willow has been like, "Oh, I want to help with the spell. Let me help. I'm really good at spells now." And he's like, "No," and he basically reveals at the end that he's not doing a spell. He wants to help Buffy, basically.
It's an emotional spell.
It's an emotional spell. It's really sweet. He also identifies then Kakistos tricking Faith and Buffy into that warehouse, which is his lair, and trapping them there. And the third trick is, but Faith tricks Buffy into dealing with Kakistos. And I was like, no, she doesn't, but okay. Love is a very clear theme. So that's the faith, hope, and love. Love being Buffy trying to move on from Angel by leaving her ring in the mansion where he then gets birthed from hell in a quite effective scene, actually. And Hope is obviously Scott Hope. He represents a potential future for Buffy. And then Faith. So Faith obviously has very little faith in herself, which is the ultimate thing here, is that Faith doesn't believe in herself. She speaks a big game, but she's a scared child underneath. And not a child in a dismissive way, but she's literally a child. I thought it was an interesting, reading of the text of just being like, oh, look at the themes here based on the title. I was like, yeah, cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's definitely a sense that kind of rules 3 in terms of how, even when they introduce, if they introduce a theme, you can usually find 2 or 3 examples in the episode. It's usually recursive in that way. I feel sorry in this episode for Scott Hope, portrayed by the chap who was in the US Queer as Folk.
Yeah, he was a really bad character in Queer as Folk as well.
But he's just trying to be nice to Buffy. And I'm tied up in my supernatural romance drama. And I don't know how many times Angel will come up in conversation where Cordelia Chase will say, oh yeah, Angel, wasn't it unfortunate how he turned out to be a vicious beast who tried to kill you? It's like, okay, we get it. You know what happened. You've listened to the podcast. But
his name is Fab Filippo.
Fab Filippo is his human name. And Scott is trying to seduce Buffy as nicely as possible. And it's going well eventually. And in the most poorly judged moment, as they're about to conclude and finalize their date to go to the Buster Keating Festival, he says, oh, I picked this up in the retro shop. It symbolizes friendship. I thought you might like it. And basically pulls, the clagger ring out, aka like a horse's head, to terrify her, and she runs away and has to deal with her trauma. And
he even imposes some specific cinematography on her. Like there's a 2D shot, basically, like a head down shot on the clagger ring, and you get zoom ins of it and everything. It gets very, very dramatic very quickly.
Yeah, it's the worst possible choice he could have made at that moment.
Yeah. Speaking of other weird characters in this episode, so K. Todd Freeman, who plays Mr. Trick, he actually was in 22 episodes of a series of unfortunate events. He is Mr. Poe in it, who is the guy who takes care or tries to help the kids and move them from place to place and stuff. He's also in a bunch of other things over the years, and he's been nominated for 2 Tonys. And the motel manager in this episode, who very quickly gets killed, who we said, oh, we definitely know him from something. He's in Malcolm in the Middle. He is Artie. I think he's one of Francis's friends.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
He was also in Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. He was one of the writers in the writer's room, so we might know him from that. And he was in the Zodiac movie.
Oh, very good, yeah.
Did I say his name? John Ennis, if I didn't. So, John Ennis. Well done, John Ennis.
And so I suppose the other significant structural thing that happens in this episode is we have the last of our kind of interstitial Angel dream sequences, which result in the fake out at the end of the episode where she leaves a clagger ring behind in the mansion, fakes it black, and then, wait, what? A post-credit sequence? I wonder if Joss Whedon will return to this structure. And the light comes up again, and Angel is manifested back from hell.
Very much birthed. He comes out all gross and slimy. He just slides out of the orifices of hell.
Jim Carrey climbing out of that rhino in Ace Ventura 2.
It's very Terminator. But yeah.
Yes, very much so. Because not just to get birth, but he's naked, which, great, whatever. But he's drenched in sweat. He's in a fetal position. It is both Terminator and obviously just very birth implications.
Yeah, but Angel's back. He has come back from hell. We never find out why or how he gets returned. It's a huge mystery, but he does.
Yeah, I think the assumption never confirmed is that the powers that be returned him, and that's something that's implied much later in Angel as well, because he becomes their champion in the Shanshu prophecy and etc. But no, yeah, it's just one of these things where this is what has happened and we now have to deal with it, which is kind of, I kind of like that, because ultimately things happen even in a supernatural world that you can't explain, and it retains some of the mystery by them having to just react to something as opposed to kill or solve it.
Yeah. So we'll definitely deal more with that, but Angel will be back next episode, no doubt.
Yeah, and we have, as I said, the kind of the last of the dream sequences of her dancing with Angel in the bronze, saying cryptic things about being sent to hell. But interestingly, they have David Boreanaz in
A white shirt, yeah.
a white shirt, but also zombie makeup, because she has a nightmare element where he's dead and she's let him die. And like that's the only time we kind of really see him in that kind of makeup for the rest of his kind of run in the universe. So it's just kind of interesting. Errata.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, do you want to throw some Buffy bits there, Joe?
Hit me with them.
Okay, you get yours ready while I'm doing this, okay? There's some interesting music bits from this episode. So there's a song from the Brian Jonestown Massacre in this episode, and they're not a great band, but whatever. There's a song by Third Eye Blind, and that was a card. Do you know what a card is?
I do not know what card is.
It's like a 5-second promo with potentially like a boosting of a specific album on an episode of like CW in the 90s, basically. It was a thing that happened. Darling Violetta, who are the band in the Bronze, are playing music, and they actually provided the theme tune song from Angel, which when I'm sitting here, I'm just like, I do not remember what the theme song from Angel is.
I will make a confession. I had the theme song from Angel, like the full length extended song version, I know on my MP3 player when I was younger.
Of course you did. K. Todd Freeman, who played Mr. Trick, actually auditioned for the role of Spike.
Oh, very good. That could be interesting.
Yeah. We get a reference to Welcome to the Hellmouth in this episode, because Buffy's watching the guy dancing with Faith and identifies him as a vampire because he's doing really retro dancing.
Yeah, he's doing that same thing with Risks that zombie did in the last episode. Just wiggling them about.
There's an Andy Griffith Show reference in this when they refer to Mayberry. We get a really nice Midnight Cowboy reference.
From Willow, of all people.
From Willow, exactly, yeah. She says, I'm walking here, which is a great Dustin Hoffman line in that movie. Mr. Belvedere is referenced. One thing I would note is that at one point, when you're talking this earlier, Faith does say that after slaying you get hungry and horny. Mm-hmm. Buffy does get horny after she slays. She
does. She doesn't want to talk about it.
Whenever she like has sexual interactions in this show, she's always just killed or done violence.
Yeah.
So there you go. I wonder if there's a...
And there are a couple of references later on, like Dawn does say that whenever she comes in from patrol and she goes straight to the fridge. So she, again, it's just her being like prim about some things, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And because she specifically hangs a lampshade on it, because when they see her Faith dancing with that guy before they know that she's Faith, Buffy talks about how you could take time and get to know people, and you can just go dancing up on people, and you know she's performing her own kind of like reluctance to.
Yeah, and Cordelia also refers to as Slutorama or something like that. It was kind of I was disappointed in Cordelia in that moment.
Yeah, but it's very Cordelia. She's very judgy. Like Willow says as well that Buffy should do that thing with her mouth that guys love.
Yeah. Ooh.
So on my side, I would just like to highlight one of my favourite things with this episode, which is Mr. Trick's attempt to portray himself as a technologically advanced person. So he says that he is going to do a computer check to try and find Faith. He also talks about if they could pump in a T3 line with 2,500 megabytes of information, they would have, the Slayers, they would FedEx a girl, download her through the internet in a second.
If he had 2,500 megabytes per second, that'd be really impressive. That's 2.5 gigs per second.
No, it could be per day. We don't know. And
that would still probably pretty fast for the time.
And Buffy has a great line where she says, "Next time I kill Angel, I'll video it." Again, it's just these kind of like little allusions, we're in the modern day, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the honourable mention I would like to give for this episode, just one of my favourite scenes, is Faith talking about how if she knew that Watchers were so young and beautiful, she would have requested a transfer to Giles.
Yeah.
And then Anthony Searhead, or Giles rather, says, let's move off from the topic of my youth and beauty for the moment. But there's a bit there where I think it's Buffy says, anyone who feels grossed out, raise your
hands if ooh.
If ooh, yeah. And the only person who doesn't raise their hand is Willow. And this actually foreshadows the fact that she later on admits that she did have a crush on Giles when she was younger.
Yeah.
Which I quite like.
Yep. One quick note there as well is that Joyce continues the coming out themes in this episode, where she says she has attempted to attend the Slayer Pride Parade, but she's finding it difficult because Buffy has just told her that she died at one point.
Just casually mentioned that she died and wanted to just wants Joyce just to move on, you know?
Yeah. When did you die? You never told me you died. Which is, I mean, it's stressful. Okay, some fashion notes. Scott Hope is at one point wearing a crimson sweater vest over a orange t-shirt.
More like Scott Nope, eh?
Scott Nope. I did like Angel in the white t-shirt in the dream sequence. I thought it was quite attractive. Faith fell into the worst 90s fashion moment of in any way possible, which is that she has a tribal tattoo.
She does a tribal tattoo. She also has hand wraps.
Yeah.
So she, has, sleeveless top or whatever, that's fine. But so her upper arms are bare, but then from her elbows down to her hands, she has like something she's wearing as well. It's like a superhero kind of gloves.
That's kind of cool.
And black painted nails, because everyone has them. Oz has them. Spike has them. It's just a thing.
I'm kind of into it. She's also wearing a red leather or crimson leather trousers at one point, and I was into it. I thought it was really cool.
Oz also wears a big baggy velour shirt that's like a bleeding purple tie-dye, it's washed out.
At the same time, he always wears those things better than Xander does. So
he does, that's true.
And at one point, Giles is wearing a really, really ugly tie.
He does have a collection of bad ties. I think we do just very briefly mention that Buffy gets back into school on this episode, and we have a scene with Snyder, and Snyder has to be the only character, potentially one of the few characters. He wears the exact same thing every single one of his appearances. Can you imagine? Well, obviously, except for the dream sequence in season 4. But can you imagine Snyder wearing anything other than just that red tie and that really ill-fitting tweed suit?
I cannot. Do you have a death count for us, Joe?
I do have a death count. So we have the employee of the Happy Burger, who was drained by Mr. Trick. We have Disco Dave, quote unquote, the outdated vampire dusted by Faith. Pizza delivery guy drained by Mr. Trick. 4 vampires variously dusted by Buffy during the final confrontation. The motel operator from Malcolm in the Middle, killed ambiguously by Kakistos. And finally, Kakistos himself, Mr. Kissing Toast, pierced with a enormous oversized novelty steak by Faith.
Okay, do you want my rating?
I do want your rating, yeah.
Okay, gonna give this episode 8.3 5x5s out of 10.
Is it good or bad that I was considering that rating?
It's bad if you considered it and then moved on.
No, do you want to tell me why? Why?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of interesting stuff here. I think the introduction of Faith is seamless, interesting and fun. It's not transcendent by any stretch of imagination. It's a great season 3 episode, if you get me.
Great, yeah. I would actually say, I would say 8.3 as well. That was the number I had in mind. I'm not going to change it. 8.3 taquitos. I'm going to say that again. 8.3 taquitos.
Okay.
So yeah, I agree. I think fun, zest, it packed a lot in a short period of time. Everyone acted in their voice.
It had themes.
And it was just a good rollicking episode of Buffy. And there's always that excitement. It's like, oh, a second Slayer.
Yeah.
That's always a fun thing to do.
It is. And the last Slayer.
The last Slayer, the final Slayer.
Yeah.
So Faith is going to bring a lot to this show, and I'm excited for it.
I have actually looked at the title of the next episode 4 times now, trying to remember it for when we're doing it. Because I'm talking as well and listening, I can't also read because my brain breaks.
Talking, thinking, listening all at the same time are very difficult, Brian.
You see, talking by itself is very difficult for me, which is why I do a podcast. Okay, so the next episode that we're going to talk about next week is going to be Beauty and the Beasts, which I can't remember. Oh yeah, it's kind of like an Oz-ish werewolf episode, I think. It's actually the first time in ages that we've been watching an episode where I haven't been deeply aware of it well in advance. Mm-hmm. Which is going to be great. It's going to be nice and easygoing.
Okay, so do you feel sufficiently dusted, Brian?
I feel the dustiest.
Great. Okay, well, thanks folks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Join us next week for Beauty and the Beasts. So in the interim, please follow us on Twitter. Tell us if you have any thoughts about the next episode. Tell your friends, tell your Clagger Ring wholesalers, and we will see you, retro shoppers. We will see you next time on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See ya.
Bye.